everybody. Hope you're all doing well today, that you guys enjoy your extra hour of sleep. My daughter woke up at 2, which is really 3, crying, needed a bottle, so I'm been great. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit something about kind of like how my normal day goes. Right now, my wife and I, we have 2 children under the age of 4. We live in Maryland. It's a long story. I work here in Northern Virginia. My wife works in D.C. The preschool childcare for kids is the same place. It's about 20 minutes away from our house. We have to be up by 6 a.m. And that's enough time to kind of like barely eat breakfast, get ready, get changed, wake up kids, feed them breakfast, get them dressed, brush your teeth. My wife has to be out the door by 7 to be on time for work. So I'm the one that has to do all the drop-offs. I have to be out the door by 7:30 in order to make drop-offs sometime and then come to work. My wife does pickup. She usually gets out of work between 3:30, but it's more like 3:45 until she gets to the kids' preschool daycare, picks the kids up, gets home. It's usually like 4:45, 5 p.m. Some days I get to work from home. The days I don't work from home and I work here, I leave the office kind of like between 4 and 4:15, and I'm getting home between 5:30, sometimes 6, depending on how 495 wakes up that morning. And then we get home, and it's like, we have to make dinner. We play with the kids for a little bit, then it's bedtime routine. Last couple months, we've really been struggling with our son Jack going to bed, and it's like a long thing. Sometimes it's like a 2-hour journey to get that kid to fall asleep. Thankfully, we're coming out of that, but right now, Julia is teething. So that's like a whole other, complication of things. Kids are in bed, and then we have to go downstairs. We have to do the dishes. We have to make lunches for the next day. We have to make bottles for Julia, and then we have to pick up the kitchen and the living room floor. Before you know it, it's like 9:30, and sometimes both me and my wife will have stuff from work that we still need to catch up on, get done. So there's a little bit of that. My wife is the president of our local neighborhood association, which means that sometimes she has evening meetings. She is also in this advisory board council thing for our county. My wife's like really smart. I married that. Anyway, so she has that, and that means that sometimes she has some evening meetings because of the nature of this job. Sometimes I have evening meetings because you people have like 9 to 5s, and then the only way I can talk to you is after you're done with work. We have life groups, so that's like a whole another evening of the week. By the time we go to bed, we are exhausted. Now, I know that our particular case is just a season, and the details of our lives make it a little bit harder than it should be, and hopefully in the next couple of years, some of those details will change. My point is this. If you were to ask us on a normal day how we feel, we're going to tell you that we're really tired, that we're always in a hurry, and that we feel like we don't have enough time. Does that sound familiar to anybody in this room? My guess is that if I did a poll of everybody here, plenty, if not most of you, would answer in some similar way. You have a long commute, and you have this long list of extracurricular activities going on after, and you feel like you don't have enough time. You're probably tired, and you're probably feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. A few years ago, God used this book to kind of like wake up my mind to the sense that maybe this pace of life is unsustainable. So in the interest of full disclosure, I'm going to be drawing some information today from a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by Christian author John Mark Comer. And part of the idea of the book is this theme of hurry. And he's kind of like connecting the idea of where our understanding of burnout and hurry comes from. And he mentions actually that it's kind of like something that we started thinking through in the 50s. I don't know if you've ever heard of the term like somebody being like a type A personality, type B personality. You don't know where that comes from. Back in the 50s, there was this cardiologist named Meyer Friedman. And he started noticing that some of the chairs in the waiting room of his office started wearing down faster than other chairs, which is like a really weird thing because they were buying them all at the same time. And because I guess doctors are like curious people, he started paying attention to that. And what he realized is that the chairs that were wearing down faster were wearing down because some of his patients, the ones that had the highest propensity for cardiovascular disease, the ones who usually were also angry and irritable and were always acting like they were in a hurry and they were stressed out and didn't have enough time, were so fidgety waiting for their appointment that they were wearing down the church. And that's kind of like how the study of type A, type B personality emerges. And in the middle of that study, one of the things that he kind of comes to define is that one of the things that characterizes type A personality people is something that he calls hurry sickness. And this is how he defines it: a continuous struggle, an unremitting attempt to accomplish or achieve more and more things or participate in more and more events in less and less time. Now, this is back in the 50s, and when fast forward time, what we realized is that this kind of like idea doesn't only apply to type A personality, high risk of, heart disease people. It's like a broader thing. Back in the 90s, there's this catering company of all things in the UK, and they're doing a study on the needs of British businesses. As they're doing this study, one of the things that kind of like emerges from that is that it's like 10,000 people, huge study, that a lot of the people they were interviewing and were getting data about were experiencing high levels of stress because of the time pressures of their job, to the point that being in a hurry became their default mode. So even when they weren't late or they weren't time pressure for something, they still acted and felt like they were in a hurry. And this heightened level of stress made them susceptible to illnesses more than other people. And what researchers realized, this is the same thing that Meyer Friedman was talking back in the 50s. Psychology Today has a couple definitions of hurry sickness. It says it's a behavior pattern characterized by continual rushing and anxiousness, an overwhelming and continual sense of urgency, or a malaise in which a person feels chronically short of time and so tends to perform every task faster and to get flustered when encountering any kind of delay. In the book that I mentioned, John Mark Comer lists what he thinks are like 10 symptoms of hurry sickness. And I just want to read them through you. Don't tell anybody, but I would like to, in your mind, think if any of this describe you. Number one, irritability, hypersensitivity, restlessness, workaholism or nonstop activity, emotional numbness, out of order priorities, lack of care for your body, escapist behaviors, slippage of spiritual disciplines, isolation. If you got more than 5, I'll give you a treat after this. I would posit that a lot of us, maybe more than would like to admit or realize, suffer from some form of hurry sickness. Now, here's the thing. You'll be hearing me this. It's like, well, dude, that's just life, right? Like, I'm a young professional in Northern Virginia, and that's the price that I pay for the life I want to live. And it's, I'd rather be busy and have a family and do all those things than not have any of these and be like a loser sitting at my home, not doing anything, right? So what? And to a certain degree, I would say that you're right. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty about your lifestyle, and you heard how my life usually goes. I'm very aware of the challenges of being a professional with young children in the DMV. What I would say, though, is that I think there is a difference between having a lot to do and having too much to do. Think of that list of 10 symptoms, right? Is that how any of us want to live? And the reason we're talking about hurry today is because this hurry sickness or this pathological sense of hurry, this having too much to do, is incredibly detrimental not only to our physical or emotional health, but to our spiritual life. Okay? We talked about physical health, right? Like apparently being that hurry can affect your, propensity for heart disease. Right? And it's so hard to make a correlation between hurry and stress or anxiety. I would argue that this level of hurry affects our relationships. How many of us in this room respond our worst when we're in a rush? That's when we're less patient and the most irritable. Let me take it one step further. How many of us usually respond like that to the people that demand our time and attention the most? Which is usually our family and our closest friends. John Mark Comer, kind of like thinking about it, describes it this way. He says, hurry and love are incompatible. all my worst moments as a father, a husband, and a pastor, even as a human being, are when I'm in a hurry, late for an appointment, behind on my unrealistic to-do list, trying to cram too much into my day. I use anger, tension, a critical nagging, the antithesis of love. I would argue, though, there's not only that it does that, it also affects our relationship with God. There's this famous pastor, John Ortberg, author. He was teaching pastor one of the largest mega churches in the U.S. back in the 90s, and he was a disciple of Dallas Willard. You've heard me preach before. You've heard me mention Dallas Willard. Dallas Willard was a philosophy professor at USC, but he's also one of the most prolific Christian writers when it comes to the topic of spiritual formation and spiritual disciplines. And, you know, John Ortberg is starting to feel this tension in his life between like the hectic schedule that he had and his own spiritual life. So he comes to see Dallas Willard for a meeting, and he asks him, what should I do? And Dallas Willard's advice for him is, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Why is that exactly? Well, because one of the things you see through the Bible is two ideas. One is this, that what hurry does is that it makes the urgent take precedence over the important. Okay? And when the urgent takes precedence of the important becomes kind of like an obstacle in what we need to do. Now, the problem with that is that when you look at the Bible, the way in which God works in the lives of people, the way that true spirituality is cultivated, is not from one day to the next. Like, God actually works slowly in the life of people. It's a journey that requires time and attention and intentionality. There's this Japanese theologian called Kosuke Koyama, and he has this book called 3 Mile an Hour with God. 3 mile an hour is the speed of walking. So that's kind of like the idea from the book. And he says this: God walks slowly because he is love. If he's not love, he would have gone much faster. Love has its speed. It is an inner speed. It is a spiritual speed. It is a different kind of speed from the technological speed to which we are accustomed. It is slow, yet it is Lord over all other speeds, since it is the speed of love. And if this is true, then the more in a hurry that we live our lives, the harder it becomes to keep up with God, not because it's going too slow, but because we're going too fast. Think about it. Remember, the urgent takes precedence over the important. If we're honest for a second, if you stop seeking God, if you stop having quiet time, if you stop, cultivating your spirituality, if you stop praying, stop reading the Bible, God isn't going to fire you because he loves you. You know that. If you don't hit that deadline for work, you might get fired. So when you have more in your schedule than you can handle, the urgent takes precedence over the important. And the things that matter most get shoved to the side. The Catholic writer Ronald Rolheiser says it this way. He says, today, a number of historical circumstances are blindly flowing together and accidentally conspiring to produce a climate within which it is difficult not just to think about God or to pray, but simply to have any interior depth whatsoever. We, for every kind of reason, good and bad, are distracting ourselves into spiritual oblivion. It is not that we have anything against God, depth, and spirit. We would like these. It is just that we're habitually too preoccupied to have any of these show up on our radar screens. We're more busy than bad, more distracted than non-spiritual, and more interested in the movie theater, the sports stadium, and the shopping mall, and the fantasy life they produce in us, than we are in church. Pathological busyness, distraction, and restlessness are major blocks today within our spiritual lives. There's an example of this in the Gospels, like the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10. This is Jesus going to dinner with one of his friends, and these two sisters named Martha and Mary are kind of like hosting him. And it says this: as Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught. But Martha was, listen to this word, distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me. But the Lord said to her, my dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. Can I tell you a secret? Most pastors hate this passage. You know why? Because we love Marthas. Because Marthas get stuff done. Okay, Marthas, you can count on them to show up early and to set up and to stay up late and to do what they were going to say. The modern American church was built on Marthas and runs on Marthas. I love me some Marthas. Okay, if you're a Martha, come talk to me after the service. I have like 17 things I would like you to do. Okay? And by the way, I don't think that Jesus is necessarily saying that what Martha's doing is wrong, because one of the things that we know about Jesus is you love to eat. Right? She's working on that big dinner. Guess what? Jesus is going to eat himself some of that big dinner when it's ready. What Jesus is chastising, though, what Jesus is talking about, the problem that Jesus has is a distraction. That apparently, if you understand the passage well, Jesus is teaching and he's meaning for both Martha and Mary to hear what he has to say. And Martha is present there, but she's not present there. Because she's thinking about all the other stuff that is going on. Now, that's never happened to anybody in this room, but I'll tell you my story, right? When I started working at a church, I was kind of like overseeing groups and stuff like that, and then we had an issue that our worship pastor left, so then I was in charge of that. I remember the first 3 months of working at my church, I would sit down with my wife for worship, and all I was thinking about was everything that was going on in the service. The lights, the people on stage, were people on key, was that slide the right side. And I would like get up in the middle of the service and go up to like yell at people I don't yell, they're wonderful. But anyway, I would go back to the tech and say, hey, what are you doing? Okay. My mind was anywhere else except in worship. And I wonder what you say to Martha is like, I'm here and I'm teaching and you get to sit at my feet and listen to me. I want you to sit at my feet and listen to me. And your mind is anywhere else but here. I think that's what Jesus is calling out. Now, if hurry is such a problem, the obvious solution is that we need more time, right? When I was a kid, I used to watch this Japanese TV show called Dragon Ball Z. I don't know if anybody kind of like around my age watched that when you were kids. And in that show, there was this thing called the hyperbolic time chamber, which sounds like something that LeBron James uses to train and still be good at like 42. And the idea of the hyperbolic time chamber was that you would walk into this room and time moves slowly. So you could be there for like a year, and outside it had only been like 1 day, and that's how like you train for a fight or whatever. And I remember when I started college, and even when I started preaching, sometimes fantasizing about something like that. Because my problem is I never feel like I'm prepared. That there's always another book to read, there's always another message to listen, there's always another article to check out before I can write a paper, before I can write a sermon. But that's not reality. That's a fantasy. Time is a limited resource. We only get 24 hours a day. And to be honest, I'm not sure that if we had more time, that we'll use it wisely. Because if how we've gotten to the place that we've gotten is because of how we manage time, if we got all of a sudden an extra 5 hours, what is to say that we're not going to spend those extra hours working longer hours? Or signing up our kid for that third sport? Or like catching up on all the Netflix shows that we haven't watched, right? We don't need more time. I would argue that what we need is a complete redefinition of our relationship to time. And part of the ways in which we do that is by setting up some guardrails around our time. Which is great since we're doing a series on guardrails right now. Now don't panic. This wasn't a 20-minute introduction. We're like more than halfway through. Okay? But what I do for the rest of my time is I want to give you 3 guardrails and 3 spiritual practices that can help us protect our time and change how we think about time. Now, before I do that, I want to invite you to Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. The first week that we did this series, we read this passage, and I love the paraphrase that Eugene Peterson has of this passage. It says this: are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. One of the biggest paradoxes of Christianity, following Jesus, is that on one hand, following Jesus is a call into discipleship. It's a call into apprenticeship with Jesus. It's a call to practices and rhythms and activities, things that Jesus is calling us to do. Now, the problem is that in our modern American minds, we hear that, and we're exhausted just hearing that. Because what it sounds like is that Jesus says, I have more stuff for you to do on top of all the other stuff you already have going on in your life, right? So you maybe are trying to be a good husband, a good wife, a good parent, a good brother, sister, whatever. And now, if you want to be a good Christian, there's this extra 10 hours of work a week that you have to do. And what Jesus is saying in this passage is actually that's not how it works. Christianity, following Jesus, is this complete redefinition of how we engage time and how we organize our lives, where following Jesus becomes an act of enjoyment and reception of life. It's a life-giving activity that leads us to rest and leads us to refreshment. And I love the imagery that Eugene Peterson uses. He says, the unforced rhythms of race. Like a rhythm, it's implying a different relationship to time. I want you to think for a second. If the pace at which you're living your life right now was a musical rhythm, what rhythm would it be? Would it be like a chilled, slow down, maybe like some bossa nova, like a bolero, like something like nice, or we made like an EDM rhythm, or like a heavy metal, like. If the beat of your life was shown in BPMs, what would it look like? Jesus is inviting us to an unforced rhythm of grace, to a different way of understanding time. So what could that look like? Number one, the guardrail of margin by the practice of simplicity. Let me explain to you this. You know what the core of the problem that we have with time is? It's the idea that our instinct is to transcend our limits. Our instinct is to fill our schedule with as much as we think we can handle, only to realize that we can't handle as much as we think we can handle, or that the initial agreements that we made require more than we thought they required. And kind of like a lot of studies on burnout, one of the things that they explain is that in the last few decades, there's been this change where before we were what's called a disciplinary society. A disciplinary society is a society where the main goal, everything is arranged for people to fall in line, to obey, to get their place, to stay in a particular lane of work and do a particular thing. An achievement society, whereas we're now, it's more you can do anything you want, you can be anything you want, you should be and do anything you want. And the tension there is that then all of a sudden there is this burden that if we somehow don't maximize and fulfill our potential, we're a waste or we've missed out on life. So we try to fill it up as much on the work end and on the pleasure end. We want to watch all the shows. We want to go to all the concerts. We want to take all the trips. We want to have all the experiences. And we also will work harder hours because we want to get the promotion and we want to be the best we can be at this thing. And you know what we also do? We burden our kids with that. So we sign them up for every sport and for every extracurricular so that they can have a better rounded, experience of life than you had. And somehow also that helps them get into a better college, right? Our default is to push against our limits as much as we can. Now, let me take you to the book of Genesis for a minute, okay? Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Then God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground. And you keep reading that passage, and it's all about how humans are made in the image of God, and they're basically giving the earth to rule and to fill and, be fruitful and multiply. Being a human, and we looked at this during the Guardrails for Work message, being a human is meant to be imbued with this incredible amount of potential from our Creator because we're made in His image. if you go to Genesis 2, there's an alternative telling of creation. It looks a little bit different. Genesis 2, verse 7. Then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. He breathed the breath of life into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person. On one hand, you have this idea of being made in the image of God and being made to a lot of potential. And on the other hand, it's saying the material out of which humans are made is dust, is dirt. It's a very limited material that disappears. The psalmist thinking about this. It says this, Psalm 103, verse 14. For he knows how weak we are. He remembers we are only dust. Our days on earth are like grass, like wildflowers. We bloom and die. The wind blows and we're gone, as though we had never been here. We exist in this tension between the incredible potential that God has imbued in us and our very real limitations as humans. And we love thinking about potential. We hate thinking about our limitations. But this is a problem. When you read the sort of the scriptures, one of the things that you're realizing is that limitations are actually a gift from God to help you make sense of life. Actually, if you think about the story of the fall, you could read it as a way of humans trying to transcend limitation, right? When the serpent is tempting Eve, the serpent says, God knows that your eyes will be open as soon as you eat it, talking about the fruit, and you will be like God. The core temptation of humanity is to transcend our limitations and being like God. This is where that becomes a problem. Think about time, think about work, think about all these things. When we transcend our limitations, what we're saying is, I want to take on the role beyond what I can do and do more than that. The problem with that is that then you also take the weight of that. If you remember when we did the message on work that Chad preached, one of the things Chad said is one of the reasons why we overwork and don't rest is because we think that we stop working, the world's going to stop spinning. That if we don't do everything we can, then that project is going to fall apart, the company is going to fall apart, the church is going to fall apart, my family is going to fall apart. I cannot stop and rest. Why is that? Because you've put on yourself a pressure that's not meant for you to carry, of keeping the world spinning. The Christian author Pete Casero, he says, our calling is not found only in our potential, it's actually found in our limits. It's not only how much we can do, it's what we can't do that helps us discern that. And that conversation makes us a little bit uncomfortable because it makes us feel that we cannot do more than we can. But I actually would argue that that's how God wants us to live, He wants us to enjoy. Listen, you know the song, I wish I was a little bit taller, I wish I was a baller. That's the anthem of my life, okay? I wish I could transcend 5'3". Look, on a good day, 5'3" and 2/8", okay? I would love that. I'm not going to. This is not in my height, okay? Michael Jordan, try as he might, he will never be as good a basketball player as LeBron James. It's not going to happen, okay? It's just a reality, a foundational reality of life, right? Okay, limits are a gift from God. And the way that we understand that in the concept of time is that we adapt the guardrail of margin. And by margin, I mean this. The space between your load and your limits. The guardrail of margin says, I am not going to take on as much as I can handle. I'm going to leave a space, a margin. I'm not going to fill out my calendar so that every hour and every second I'm doing some sort of activity. Because I know that, A, that's not how the world works, and all of these commitments will take more than that. But also I know that at some point I will reach a breaking point. And what helps us understand that, it's discerning this idea of our calling connected to our limits, meaning what is the thing that God is calling me to do right now and pursuing that. And believe it or not, there's actually spiritual practice that helps us with that, and it's the spiritual practice of simplicity. Now, maybe you've heard of this, maybe you haven't. It's not one of the most popular ones. The reason being, because the spiritual practice of simplicity, what it says is it was kind of like a way that Christians have lived for centuries of not living with excess, particularly thinking in material possessions. The idea of not accumulating more than we need, but accumulating what we need and then living everything else with freedom and generosity. And you may think it sounds extra biblical, but take 5 minutes reading everything that Jesus says about possessions, everything that Paul says about possessions, and you are going to see this idea. Now, we have today a postmodern secular version of this. We call it minimalism. And I love there's this pastor, Joshua Becker, who actually teaches about minimalism, but kind of like has this idea of simplicity in his mind. He says this: minimalism or simplicity is the intentional promotion of the things we most value and the removal of everything that distracts us from them. I would argue that this is not just true about material possession, but it's true about every aspect of our lives. Christian author Mark Scandrett defines simplicity this way: choosing to leverage time, money, talents, and possessions towards what matters most. What if we start thinking about our time through that lens? That our time is possession that God has given us, and we're called to steward it with simplicity. So what if we commit to not sign up for as much as we can handle, but we choose with discernment what are the things that God is calling us to do at this time, in this place, and jump on those 100%, but then say no to everything else. I had a friend a few years ago. He used to go to my church in D.C., and we were talking, and he's saying that he had the opportunity of applying for this promotion at his job, and that it was going to be like a huge pay increase, and we were talking about he was going to pray for it. And I was at the time that I was like, well, why wouldn't you? Like, if you're going to get it, you're going to apply, and it's great, it's more money, like, do it. And he says, actually, because that will also mean more time away from my family. More time that keeps me from pursuing the things I think God is calling me to do. And eventually, he decided not to apply for that promotion. To be honest with you, like, maybe for some of us, it means not taking that extra shift, even though we need the money, because we know that then that's taking away the time from our families. Maybe for some of us, it means that we're not going to just load our kids' schedules with extracurricular activity every day and like 7 games on a Saturday morning in like Pennsylvania. And you laugh, but I've known you people, you know what you do. Okay. You know what I'm saying? Like why if we decide we're not going to do this because that's unsustainable and it's away at the type of life that God is calling us to do? I'm going to get in trouble with my bosses with this one. For some people, that means not serving in 14 different ministries at church at the same time. Because I've had conversations with people that are committed and love Jesus, and then they come to me and say, I'm burning out, I'm going to walk away from the whole thing. I'm like, tell me about what you do. I said, well, I serve at Journey Kids and Journey Teens and Detect Team, and I lead life. I'm like, well, no wonder you're doing that. You're doing way too much. Serving God, and we're calling people to serve right now with this campaign. We want you to serve, but we don't want it to be like this overbearing, load of stuff. Now, the other side of that is, for some people, that also means that they're stepping into 17 roles because there's people that are not doing that. So some of you need to take a step back from a couple of things. Some of you need to sign up for Journey Kids, and I hope that doesn't get me fired now I said that, okay? Now, next thing, guardrail of rest by the practice of Sabbath, okay? So it's not only that we need to create margin in our lives, it's also we need to realize the idea that we're these limited creatures that need to be restored and refreshed, and that we need rest. I won't go into much detail with this because Chad talked a lot about this a couple weeks ago, so just go back to his message on work. I will say this. Sabbath is not just a day when I'm not working on my work, but I'm doing house chores. And I'm going to Home Depot, and I'm retiling the bathroom floor, and I'm doing the Costco run, and I'm doing the whatever. And there's people that they woke up on a Monday, I'm exhausted, I feel like I didn't rest. Because you didn't. That's not what Sabbath is meant to be. A day of rest, meaning stop working. A day of delight, meaning doing things that we enjoy, things that fill up our tank. And a day of worship, meaning a day that we center our lives around God. So, go back, listen to that message, and then think through the lens of those 3 things and go do that. Okay? Now, third guardrail. The guardrail of presence by the practice of silence and solitude. It's not, how we transcend our limits? Like, we cannot, we don't have more than 24 hours in a day. You know how we try to get around that? We try to get around that by multitasking. So we want to do more than one thing at a time. So we're working from home, and we want to save money on childcare, so we think that we can watch our 8-month-old. I did not do this. I'm not talking about myself, okay? So we think that we can take a Zoom call and write a message and also feed an 8-month-old at the same time in the same place, and that none of those activities is going to suffer in any way. Okay? We think that we can be working on dinner and be at that conference call. And then you ruin dinner because you weren't paying attention to the boiling pot of water because you were trying to answer the question that your boss asked you on the Zoom call when your boss thought that you were in your home office not doing dinner. Okay? We try to reply to that important email or text message while we're having dinner, or spouse is asking us something, or kids are asking us something, and our eyes are far away. Or our eyes are on our phones instead of there. We don't know how to be present. The guardrail of presence is the guardrail about being fully present in what we're doing at the time with the people that we are. And there's actually spiritual practice that helps with that, and it's a practice of silence and solitude. One of the things that Jesus is most known for is this. Look, just one example, Luke 5:16. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Jesus has this rhythm that he's out serving in the world, healing the sick, and then he goes away by himself to a deserted place and in silence and solitude communes with his Father. In the evangelical tradition, we call that a quiet time. The problem is that I would argue that our quiet time is anything but quiet. Because we wake up and there's like 1,000 thoughts running in our mind. So we pull out the Bible app and we read like the verse of the day, and we have some form of prayer of like, thank you, I'm sorry, help me, dude. And then you walk out the door and do whatever you want. And that's the extent of our relationship with God. Now, as a pastor, I'd rather you do that than not do anything. But that's not quiet time. The idea of a quiet time is creating enough space and time that we can center on God, focus our attention on God, silence and quiet all the other noise, and be present and available for what God has to say into our life. And the thing is that I believe that that's a transferable skill. That if you learn to do that with God, you're going to be able to learn to do that with your family. You're going to have to be able to do that with your friends. You're going to be able to do that at work, of becoming fully present to the moment in which you are. Each of these guardrails and practices would require like their own message, and I have tons of information I'll be happy to share. I think I'm going to set something on the website, on our social media, and giving you a bunch of resources. If you have questions, come talk to me. But these 3 guardrails of margin and rest and presence could be the beginning of us living life in a different way. I'm going to close with this. I want to invite you to take out your communion kit for 1 second. I want to go back to the passage in Matthew that we started reading earlier. I want to remind you this, okay? I want to remind you that you're having here in this passage from Matthew, while sitting at a kitchen table with Jesus. And I want to remind you that you got home from work and you still have all this stuff to do, and you have to go pick up the kids, and you have to do that, and you're like in a hurry, and you just stop by to kind of like pick something up, and Jesus has been cooking dinner all day long. And he's like, hey, how are you doing? He's like, hey, Jesus, how are you doing? Sorry, I have to go. And you said, come down for a second. Come sit down. And you're like, okay, because it's Jesus, I'm going to sit down, right? And Jesus seems to have been baking, and there's this like big oven with this incredibly smelling, delicious bread, right? He just pulls out the bread, and he's like slicing it. As he's doing that, he's just asking you about your day. And he's asking you, are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. And you're like, yes, Jesus, that sounds great, but I have to. I said, you know what? I made some bread. Would you like some? And you're like, well, because it's Jesus, you're going to have to say yes. Right? I said, okay, fine. And then he pulls out this bread and he starts slicing and he serves this incredibly smelling, delicious bread. And he offers you a slice. And he looks at you in the eye. And you can feel like the weights are coming off from your shoulders. And you can feel like you can catch your breath for a second. And Jesus says to you, this is my body broken for you. Let's take the bread together. And you eat the bread and you are ready to get up. You just, no, sit down for a second. I drink something. I want to show you how to take a real rest. walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. And Jesus pours out. He's like, I have this wine bottle I've been laying around. It's a 2,000-year-old vintage. And he pulls out a cup and he pours the wine. And he offers it to you. And as you're holding it, you can just feel like your soul is back in your body. Like for the first time in God knows how long, you're not going 1,000 miles an hour. Jesus looks at you and he says, this is my blood poured out for you.